Hello, my name's Jodie. I'm Bickley, and a week ago, was it a week ago? I'm not sure. The 10th of October, I did something for Birmingham Design Fest. It was an event called Gather, and it was a talk I did, and some people that didn't go wanted to hear it, so I thought I'd do it on here. It's a bit long, but if you stick with it, I promise there's a lovely end. And when the sadder bits come on, just imagine really massive pictures of Moodang, because that's what I did at the talk to distract. Or I'll work out how to do it on here somehow, but I'm pretty rubbish at stuff like that, so we'll see. But yeah, this is it. Hi, my name's Jodie, and I'm here to tell you about everything. How I believe in magic and the impossible, and how I ended up on stage or in here talking to you all about it. The last time I stood on a stage to talk about everything I knew so far was TED Birmingham in 2013. I knew a lot less than I do right now, and I hadn't been on half as many adventures. It was right at the beginning of everything taking off. I was still really quite poorly, and I'm yet to watch it back. So here I am, 11 years later, to continue where I left off. My story starts in the back garden on Addison Road in Kings Heath in the summer of 2009, a day-long festival run by Cassie Philomena Smythe, where local acts performed in a garden full of faces you'd see frequenting the Hare and Hounds, the Rainbow and Snobs. Old snobs. Old snobs. I'm not sure which snobs, but the oldest snobs there has ever been. They'd been asked to perform some poems. Not that I'd ever done that before, but I'd recently been wronged by a local indie DJ and turned to MySpace to avoid my immense dissatisfaction with my experience by recording a poem about it. The poem was called On Call, after the Kings of Leon song that he had tattooed on his chest, which has since had covered up, which I can only apologise for. He was in the audience that day, and it was the response in that garden that gave me the confidence to enter the Camden Roundhouse Poetry Slam. As the only person from outside London on the bill, and not actually understanding that poetry slams included performing my poem to an audience, I settled my chances as low to none. The host was a fellow Brummie, Polar Bear, and the judges were Worcestershire, Kay Tempest, Inua Ellams, Joshua Idahen, and Jasmine Correa, none of whom I had heard of, thankfully, but mean everything now. I won by no means do I think it was because I was the best at what I did, but I had the most heart, and I think that might just have pipped it. From then on, I joined a collective alongside Joshua Idahen, Musa Kwanga, Inua Ellams, Belinda Zawe, Raymond Antrobus, Ed Sheeran, and Alex Guider. Together and apart, we performed all over. I tried to be in London as much as I could, whilst living and working in Birmingham, at the Goose, Beardosaurus and the Oasis Market, and for a brief stint as a waitress at Spearmint Rhino, which is a 25-minute talk in itself. And having very little money, leaving events to run for the last coach from London Victoria to Birmingham New Street, to go to work to fund the next tickets to get to London and perform again. It was a lot. But in that back garden in Kings Heath was Adam Regan, who realised immediately we would make the very best of friends, my words not his, and he offered me a job at the Hare, as well as a chance to run my own poetry night, Speak Up. Here I brought all of my favourites from London and beyond to perform with all the brilliant people from Birmingham, and together we created some of the loveliest nights in the history of Birmingham's poetry and acoustic scene, selling out the big room, filling the smaller room with love and laughs and pin drop moments. It was everything, and you had to be there, and if you were, it was magic. It was the summer of 2013 when I performed at my first Glastonbury, my first Shambhala, and my second festival. I was kissing on Ferris wheels, in heaps of laughter in an enchanted forest. There were fairy lights and best friends and music and Beyonce, and I came back excited. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but it felt pretty important, like I was on the brink of something, and I was just really, really ready for it. I remember the day because it was an AFT, and for anyone that has worked in hospitality and retail, it means that you're working open until close, which for me was Levi's all day, and then the Hare at night, and I loved it. I was running on Diet Coke and falling in love and being 23. When I realised something was very wrong, my first thought was the people I was letting down by not being where I was supposed to be. I'd woken up feeling really strange and lightheaded and just completely not with it. I went into the walk-in centre but couldn't stay because I felt so poorly and the wait was long and I came home a bit of a funny grey colour. By the time I got to the walk-in at Solihull Hospital, things had got a little serious and I couldn't stand and was in and out of consciousness. I was treated for meningoencephalitis, and after a while I left the hospital with a walking aid and had to revisit the art of walking and writing again. I quickly realised I didn't feel like I did before. After a period of seemingly getting better, I relapsed, heading back into hospital and later being diagnosed with ME, which was brought on by the initial infection. I spent the majority of late 2012 and into 2013 bedbound, and by late January I'd started my plans to end my life. I was on so much medication to function. I was cohabitating with a jazz trumpeter. I joke, I was, but that wasn't the reason. I was watching my peers fly and I felt like I was letting everybody down by not being where I was supposed to be. The future seemed impossible. Getting through those days were nearly impossible. On February 3rd, 2013, I said goodbye in my own quiet ways to the people I needed to. Held on a little longer in hugs, said that I love yous and really, really meant it. I'd collected enough medication to make sure I wouldn't have to face them the next day, and I took the first few tablets. Mum had downloaded some apps on my phone to keep my brain busy, and an alert came through to get some cartoon dolls ready for their big night. It was tiny, but it was a distraction, and what came after it saved my life. Who else was having this moment? The moment where they sure didn't want to be here, but there was a chance that they could stay through a distraction. A reminder that maybe they weren't in this alone. I've always been a little bit odd. I blame it solely on my mum. I'd leave notes in the back of science textbooks, bus tickets, notebook paper torn out and shoved down the sides of seats. I'd written to other people just to remind them how remarkable they are. I thought about the letters I'd written when I was younger. The letter I'd sent to heaven when my nan died when I was 5, and the love letters accompanying mixed CDs. The grand gestures I'd forever done to make people know that they mattered. What if I wrote 1 million of them? 1 million lovely letters to people who needed a little reminder that they were loved and not on their own. I turned to Facebook and Twitter and asked, if you are having a bad day or week, email me and I'll handwrite you a lovely letter for free. My inbox filled up overnight, and by the end of the first week I had 500 letter requests. Like every other early 20-something going through anything, I had 3 cats, and due to being ill, I was unemployed, so money was tight, but stamps were bought and letters were sent all over the world. Within the first batch of letters was a letter to somebody in Kings Heath, where I lived, and another to New Zealand, and the places continue to be as local as they are far away, with some of this week's being sent to West Bromwich and to China. The media quickly picked up the project and I was offered a book deal. I did a TEDx talk. I was surprised by lots of people I'd written letters to. Nicole Scherzinger serenaded me on national TV. I went on a date with Stephen Fry where we ate hot dogs and talked about our boyfriends, and John Cleese offered to take me on holiday to the Caribbean with his new wife. I became recognised by the UK government as a point of light. I became a Sunday Times bestseller. I was on Good Morning America. I was profiled in fancy magazines in Japan. I was a happiness consultant on This Morning, and I made the Independent's Happy List. And the Royal Mail made me my own stamp. I no longer had to pay to send my letters, and the cats could finally go back to the luxury that they had become accustomed to. Then, this is where mood end comes. I ended up in a psychiatric ward. The tablets I was taking to combat the headaches and the seizures and the depression, to function, to keep up to where I thought I needed to be, not wanting to let anybody down, keep my head above water, didn't mix well together, and I ended up experiencing what only can be described as a form of psychosis. None of it felt real. It felt like I'd made the whole thing up. I convinced myself I'd made the whole thing up, and what an awful human being I was to do that. I pleaded with my mum to let me go, and I'd phone my ex-boyfriend who had been by my side throughout that summer, who had loved me more than anyone ever had, who I'd left out of fear and the sheer claustrophobia of your life becoming so much smaller, to tell me over and over the story of me being ill, slide by slide, and he did. Time after time, I spoke to the doctors and nurses who treated me to tell me the story all over again, and I celebrated my mum's 54th birthday on the ward. I'd completely lost trust in myself. I think that happens when your brain kind of goes against you. It felt like the most intense pill of imposter syndrome ever, and when I see it like that, I think I've always carried the idea that I'm not quite good enough, quite heavily, for most of my days in some form. That what I do isn't really art or conceivable as a job. I've always been seen as quite whimsical and lent into that because it felt safe. That if I wasn't seen as serious, I'd never have to take myself seriously and I wouldn't have to let anybody down. I was a little bit lost, but tiny moments after tiny moments, I picked up bits of confidence in myself again. Not in big dramatic moments, but in the quiet, everyday actions that allow me to move forward, almost without realising it. And amongst the everyday, magic started to appear again. I kept writing my letters quietly, filling a wall in our house with replies from all over the world, pictures, stories, knitted mushrooms from people who had been impacted by that tiny kindness. I had some babies, 2 of them, Dylan and Dottie, and I married a boy that I met when I was 16 under the gazebos of Cadbury College. We moved to Cambodia on a whim and I wrote another book. I hung out with Ian Wright and we spoke about letters and our greatest loves. Aled Jones came to King's Heath and we filmed a BBC One documentary called Jodie's Lovely Letters, and I didn't mention the snowman once. I was the poet laureate at Glastonbury during the Brexit vote and made a lot of Leave voters very angry by writing a poem that went all over the campsite and over the internet very quickly. But that's absolutely fine, and I'd 100% do it all again. I went to a writing retreat and cried at my complete inability to write a sonnet in front of a bunch of strangers with the most picturesque backdrop. And I went on what can only be called the most magical walk of my entire existence with Richard Curtis, through an enchanted fairy-lit forest eating pizza, where we spoke about film and letters and following the joy and trusting your gut, and if walking through an enchanted forest with the patron saint of romantic comedy, may we forgive his love actually complexities, tells you to trust yourself, you may as well begin to give it a go. It wasn't actually Richard Curtis that convinced me to maybe start believing myself. I just don't get to tell that story in normal everyday life, mostly because it sounds made up, but that interaction was a little bit of it. These magic moments that I find myself in, that I've always found myself in, whether it be with a stranger on a bus or in a restaurant, in a room I feel like I don't belong in, or when I bring people together in a space, magic follows. And that sounds a little big-headed, but it just does, it always has. I'm an excellent gatherer, the best cheerleader for friends and strangers alike, and I have an eye for magic in the everyday that often goes unnoticed, and I have a knack for bringing that magic to life. My recent project, Walls of Light in Bearwood, is an example of this. On the school run, me and Fokker Wolf decided we'd paint Bearwood. Even he will tell you I got ahead of myself quite early on. I didn't want to do one, I wanted to do lots. I wanted the local children to be involved because so much of the art would be at their level, and I wanted them to feel part of it and immersed in it. I wanted lots of artists, and I was going to write an Arts Council application that was going to be the best I could ever do, and they surely couldn't say no. After a few waltzes with the Arts Council, I'm very aware that they can say no, often. A lot of people told us to not hold our breath. Fokker Wolf told me to not hold my breath as I was a bit of an excited puppy and he knew he'd have to deal with my sad girl summer. But then we got it. We got 18 walls and the work began. Over the summer, I matched artists with 17 houses and 1 business in Bearwood. With Fokker Wolf as the lead artist, we convinced Molly Cleaver, Phoebe Robinson, Lucy Rostron, Roots, Richard O'Gorman, the window artists and Boxy to create walls full of joy. And front walls, side walls, garage doors popping out on the high street. We ran a workshop with local children, could create pieces to inspire the artists. Scribbles, rainbows, birds and creatures laced through the final pieces that they now get to see every single day. There were late nights and teas on scaffold towers and snacks and hugs given by residents. Bearwood showed up and embraced the magic, the talent of these gorgeous artists. And this will now be something we aim to do every single year, because sometimes trusting in your magic, no matter how wild or avant-garde or massive it might seem, can really pay off. And if you can, come and see it. Please do. It's really, really beautiful, and I'm so proud of what we've done. That sentence isn't something I take lightly. It's part of the reason I say I believe in the impossible. It's because sometimes it feels like I'm living it. That sounds highly dramatic, and maybe it is a little, but I'm not really supposed to be here. I've really tried my best to not be here. I could never imagine my future, because I honestly didn't think I had one, not really. Not one that I'd live in Technicolor. I always thought the dark would catch up with me eventually, or that I'd just struggle through to the end on my hands and knees. To be proud of myself isn't something I ever thought I would be, but I am. I'm proud that I jump whole heart into things with no promise of safe landings, and that I believe in the goodness of people, that together we can make light little changes, whether that be in a tiny corner of Sandwell/Birmingham. I'm not sure whether I'm okay with calling Bearwood Sandwell yet. I'm still in denial on that one. But these tiny ideas we have, these punts we take on ourselves, and our abilities can impact so many, whether that be the letters or the walls or the poetry. I've made myself so available, trusted in the power of connection and vulnerability, and that I believe in people and their goodness and their strength. So, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this little talk today, it's this. Trust your magic. Trust in the impossible, even when it feels completely out of reach, because sometimes what feels impossible is exactly where the magic begins.